Right. Hello, everybody. Good morning in Berlin. I hope you all are enjoying the cultural aspects of Berlin outside of purely the cultural technology aspects as well. I'm very glad to see some familiar faces here, and I'm even more glad to see a lot of non-familiar faces here. My name is Michiel. Online, I go as MF. It doesn't stand for motherfucker, even though a lot of people like to think so. It's coming from a whole different reason, but that's not the point of today. We're not here to talk about me today. We're not here to talk about incredibly technological concepts today. We're going deeper into a cultural movement switch and looking a little bit back to the historic of this cultural movement switch alongside where are we headed to and what can you do. Before we dive into the current, let's dive a little bit deeper into the past. The concept of privacy is, let's say, a fairly new concept that started growing bigger and bigger into the Renaissance times of Europe, likely in other places. I'm keeping my main focus within the European and Eastern European knowledge alongside the Western American knowledge too. In about the 1700s, you had John Locke starting to describe privacy as an inheritable human, not as a right, but as almost a human satisfactionary condition. In the 18th century, we started having Foucault, who was describing his surveillance prison, a prison where you could be watched at all and any given time, even though you might not directly be watched. This concept became incredibly important as it's the concept of being under constant surveillance that creates a mental threat and thus forces people to behave. This is exactly the opposite of what privacy does, but this is the feeling that people receive when they don't have the chance to be private. Then that went on for a long time. Human went through a lot of stress. The Second World War happened as well. And after the Second World War was happening, after it finished around 1948, suddenly people had way more time. There was a very big well-being timing. People started having more money. They started rebuilding Europe, rebuilding after the war. We had the American soaring 50s almost that were happening too, alongside suddenly people had jobs, money, and time to be able to feel comfortable, and then the Maslow pyramid allowed them to start caring about their privacy too. Before we go further in the 50s, it's important to imagine the 1948 when back then George Orwell wrote a book in 1984. He started giving us a glimpse in a potential dystopian future where you are constantly being controlled by some being or some group of beings that we know as Big Brother, which also the term coined from. After 1948, we started going through more history and more time, and the world started evolving. Nazi Germany was about to disappear already at this time, and we started having the East and the West in Berlin, where we are right here in the East, actually creating a huge differential approach to what is this dystopian future now. Who here has in general heard about the word called privacy or cypherpunks, especially cypherpunks? Can you just raise your hands here? Wow. Now, who has not? That's also something I would like to see. Wow, you all are smart here, fantastic. While we go through after Big Brother, suddenly we started also seeing around the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, we had the German Wall coming up, which created a whole new environment where we had the actual Cold War mentality playing out in the physical world. The Stasi that started in Germany came from the former KGB, was tasked to know everything about anyone. A constant threat of surveillance, constantly happening in Eastern Europe, to a point, Eastern Berlin, Eastern Europe at that point, to a point where people would end up having about 1 in 6.5 could be an informant. To put that in reality, that's about, if you have a dinner party with 12 people, there was an incredibly high chance that one of the people who come to your dinner party was somehow involved with the Stasi or KGB in that sense, in a secondary aspect, to start surveilling you and what you said, what you did. This picture you see right here, seemingly a very dense picture. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what's happening outside of a man and I'm assuming a woman here stepping into the car. It shows how a very innocent picture at first glance can be turned into something that can be seen as very dangerous for the people who are not aware of any other context. It makes a threat where anything you do, everything you do, can be put in a certain perspective, and this perspective can be used against you. This quickly changed, however. In 1989, when we started having the Berlin Wall that started breaking down, people raided in a formal way, visited the Stasi headquarters to be able to look into all of the archives of people, their personal information and data here in Berlin. Before we go back to where the Berlin Wall fell off, I think it's incredibly important to note that in 1970, Germany was the first country, Western Germany at that point, to implement digital privacy as an actual law, the right to have digital privacy, which led further to in 1984, where we had the Chaos Computer Club starting up to work on what is this digital privacy. Funny enough, it's on the same timeline like we had George Orwell book happening, but this clearly starts showing where we have the movement before the wall is even broken, where people not only started to be politically but also technically involved with privacy. And obviously, as we all know, in 1993, we had Eric Hux writing his Cypherpunk manifesto, which clears after the fall of the Soviet wall a new era, because a lot of people not only are openly communicating for privacy and encryption models, they are literally exporting them, shipping them, being the cypherpunks as we know them today. One of the big parts, and for those who also read the manifesto, it's a very short, it's about 1 page, that you've definitely seen around, is called Cypherpunk's Right Code. Now, Cypherpunk's Right Code comes from more of an ideology within the manifesto where people should proactively engage and practically engage with what they do to improve the security and the privacy of everybody else. I would actually argue that the writing code aspect is not relevant at all anymore today. Definitely not as much as it was back then. And I see a lot of angry looks here to people. I also write code. I'm not trying to de-justify the aspect of writing code, but back in the 1993, when the manifesto got released, being able to write code was an incredibly privileged situation. To be able to work with encryption models on a foundational level in the 90s required you to have a very strong university level of background, or let's say not necessarily a very wealthy, but definitely a upper middle class background and family who could support you throughout university. It requires you to have access to very strong computers, which back then were mainly limited to mainframes and universities, and maybe some governmental organizational prospects around that. And not only did you need to have access to all of these tools, you also needed to be able to have the time and space to actively be able to work with these tools outside of your potential job. We came to a world now where everybody here in this room has at least one technological device on them that can compute encryption models. I see a lot of phones here, I see MacBooks, I see laptops. I would argue that probably with the basic chipsets we have in the cameras that are live streaming us right now, you could probably enforce some kind of an encryption model. We are living in a world where writing code becomes building. We are living in a world, especially with AI, everybody here can start with an encryption model and apply it to whatever and however they do it. We have open source, we have all these people who are building and have been building for us. These shoulders of giants we're currently standing upon allows us to focus on the building aspect rather than only the aspect of needing to write code. Now, what does cypherpunk inherently mean? It's not about who I am, who you guys are. It's not about who the people outside of here are, who are not necessarily even aware what cypherpunk is. What I would argue, it's about the right for private communications, allowing to talk with people using end-to-end encrypted systems, using any kind of a system that allows you to talk to your mom without needing to worry that you are being listened to by some kind of a government or, for the same sake, a corporation in this sense. The right to be anonymous and use pseudonyms. From the culture where I came from before, having the ability to have a pseudonym, just as I'm using MF, allows for a big safety network within your mental space to explore. Being able to learn new things, explore new environments, being able to try to justify your new thoughts that might be controversial, all of these can be secured by your right to be anonymous and having a pseudonym. It allows you and me to have a playground with this world without needing to worry that the effects of our experiments are going to be retraced directly back to ourselves. Now here in West Europe and / Germany, this becomes less and less important because likely you won't be prosecuted for talking out your thoughts. This becomes more and more important when we're dealing with environments where this is not always the case. Myanmar, even Turkey has been having issues with this. Along with all of these other things is one of the main reasons why blockchain also becomes incredibly important for this movement, is having the chance to enforce anti-censorship. That does not mean that necessarily everybody has you should be able to share your thoughts with everybody. It's up to everybody to understand what and how is happening within yourself and how you conceive that. But it does give you the right that nobody can shut your communications and your conversations down. If I want to talk to a person and a person wants to talk to me, it shouldn't be able to a government say, no, you cannot do this. Sorry, this thing, technology, right? It's always so fun until we need to work with it. Now, hiding is the last aspect that makes it important that we can not just utilize. We're having some issues here with the presentation. Thank you. And the next aspect is hiding the hiding, which allows you not only to have your anonymous and pseudonymous environment, not only create censorship-resistant and decentralized tools to be able to use it in the way you want to use it, but also not being questioned necessarily when you do them. Not everybody needs to know how much encryption technologies or privacy-related technologies you are using. Not everybody necessarily needs to be aware that you are having 1 million in your crypto wallet or 5 euros for the same sense. Having the right to hide your hiding gives you the right to be able to transceive the way you want to, share the data you have about yourself the way you want with people. Now that can sometimes create an issue of trust, which can also be hard for the other person to transceive, but in the end we all have the same rights to be private and hide the hiding. One of these concepts that is definitely important to keep in mind, that all of these tools we built with, just as much for good people, we also have the other side of the coin where, let's say, bad people, into a relevant metaphor, can also abuse these tools. What do we do if terrorists start using our encryption models and privacy tools to make sure they're hidden and fund terroristic attacks, for example? What do we do if pedophiles are using this to hide on the dark web and abuse a lot of people their life throughout their own, let's say, bad situations? What do we do when, let's say, political party that we don't support also enforces their own encryption and models and starts hiding the propaganda they are trying to feed their people? I would argue we can't do much. We have a big coin of privacy, encryption, and technology that allows you and me to be safe. And just as you can use a hammer to create a house, somebody can also use a hammer to crack open somebody's skull and steal their crypto. In the end, it's less about what the tool is, it's more about in which perspective the tools are used. Just as much as we have, let's say, the black hat I was just mentioning about, abusing or utilizing in their own benefit the tools we all create to try to help people. Just as much are they incredibly important for the white hats we are also aware of. White hats, I'm talking about in a very broad spectrum, not only limited to actually hackers, but this can just as much be a journalist trying to shine light on a restrictive governance. This can just as much be a politician who is trying to make sure we are still having the right for privacy. A couple of weeks ago, the GDPR was being revised by the European Union. These kind of a very big law changes require a lot of lobbying from our side, as in caring about the privacy technology, just as much as it probably receives a lot of lobbying from the side that is pro more surveillance technology. People like to know things they're not supposed to know. We all like to know a secret. We all like to know something that somebody tells us, oh, you shouldn't know this. I think a lot of us will get very curious. Nonetheless, having these white hats, journalists, politicians, developers, cryptographers, designers, all of these become incredibly important to be able to support the movement we're trying to continue, as in the end, it just stays with a very, let's say, elaborate rat race, where we're not racing to be rich. Maybe you become rich while building these things. There's definitely a lot of stories on how those are possible. You know, a very simple example, look at what WhatsApp did. Even though they get, let's say, bought by the devil through Meta, they still built one of the biggest end-to-end communication channels that is being used globally. So how do we get to organize ourselves, and how does this resolve into a mission where we are headed? I want all of you to kind of look within what you do and who you know, really embrace the feeling that we need more than only technological implementations of incredibly complex papers. Just as much, we also need complex papers to be able to continue the development on this technology. We need financial support, not only from VCs and fundraisers, but we need the resources in general to be able to support this kind of environment. Big computers are not cheap. I'm sure all of you are aware of that. And as you know, we're looking towards an age where quantum computing is expected to happen in the next 3 years to break our general encryption knowledge. We also need to be able to have the funds to be able to change our algorithms to be able to resist that. Next to the resources, we need to be able to allow people to build with us. Designers are just as valuable as cryptographers. A business developer might not be able to completely explain to you on how PGP is working, but he will definitely get more people to use PGP than the average developer in general. Each of these roles, each of these people carry a small part of a very big picture. To be able for us to keep moving this very big picture forward, we need to be able to also engage with the people who are not normally involved in how and what we work with. Now, I'm about to reach the end of my talk in this sense. I had a big QR code that I'm hoping at some point we can get on the screen as well. There's currently one of my missions I like to push to everybody here in this space. Something everybody here can do right now is a QR code where you can scan, and if you're part of the European citizen, you can provide feedback up to a next regulation that is closing by the 18th of June. And in this regulation, people are trying to enforce where third-party data providers need to keep the metadata. Yeah, fantastic, thank you. You can leave your comment and feedback there. It explains you also what the exact regulations are, but it improves a lot. The more we vote, the more people we can communicate to that this is not okay. We want to own our own data, our own privacy. We don't necessarily want people to have even more metadata, because having more metadata is sometimes even a bigger problem than already having gone through the end-to-end encryption systems. You can be completely end-to-end encrypted, but if Meta knows your location, timing of your messages, and with whom you've sent your messages, that can still give them enough context to be able to justify a warrant or arrest, which will then enforce a governmental actor to access your messages. We need you, we need privacy, we need all of you not only to push and work on these things, which is obviously the easiest way to help. Try to get your grandmother to use Signal instead of Facebook Messenger. Try to get your parents to just switch. Like, most people really don't care, which is kind of a sad and a good thing, but it also allows you to really try to adjust the behavioral to something that more people care about. Thank you very much. I'm MF. You can also say Michiel, and I hope to see around all of you more in the future as well.
Thank you very much, MF. We will be continuing to Q&A. We have around like 4 minutes to take some questions. If we can get the QR code on the screen, yes, you will be able to scan the QR code, submit your questions if you have one, and also upload questions. So I'll be starting with the most popular one. Do you have one tangible recommendation for me to help me protect my privacy and be more cypherpunk?
Stop using TikTok and Instagram. I know it's a very hard thing to do, not only for the scrolling and the funny videos, but social media as its own keeps creating this character about all of us. I'm myself, having been part of a lot of music collectives and event collectives, it's very easy to just get somebody's Instagram to connect. Switch that to Signal, for example. And maybe in 5 years, it's a different communication media. Try to have your conversations one-on-one with people instead of necessarily making the pictures of your environment public. That's a very obvious one. And a next one you could argue, if you want to go even deeper, is to enforce all of your, let's say, on-chain privacy through a variation of tools. Going through shielded pools, going through, let's say, railgun systems, utilizing Monero for your payments is something that can be already utilized. You might not be able to always pay at a bakery with Monero, but I did see that since recently you can pay with Monero in a lot of spars in Switzerland for all the Swiss people here. Thanks to Cake Wallet for that.
The next one is, whose responsibility is it to educate about privacy for the good?
I think it's a public social responsibility we have. Just as much as I'm, talking and yapping here about how the past and where I see where we need to be headed to, just as much can you do this too. People don't really know necessarily about privacy that much. They care about it. They don't want to have, they don't want to see people watching them when they go to the toilet, right? You don't want to necessarily know that people are watching you when you are having your private business. Educating them does not mean to enforce your mentality on them. We're trying to avoid the enforcement of mentalities because that's exactly what we're fighting against in this sense. Having them to educate more about blockchain privacy, I'll invite you to check out Web3 Privacy Now, which I'm a contributor to too. We have a lot of information on our website that can help you further.
The last quick one will be, how does privacy play together with the currently public nature of most public blockchains?
So one of the big reasons blockchains became so useful is because of the transparency, obviously. You can follow the moment money enters, you can very easily follow it through which wallet and transactions it's going. Now, the on-ramp and the off-ramp are the main ways somebody could see who you are through one way or another. If you buy through a KYC exchange system like Coinbase or Binance, very likely they know who you are and where the funds are. There's peer-to-peer on-ramp and off-ramps, and that will allow you already to enter a blockchain without necessarily anybody knowing your ID linked to this wallet address. Once your wallet address gets doxed or somehow figured out, it's all about rotating, cleaning, and changing the specific wallet you use. An important thing that I definitely want to argue for is not everybody here needs a full black box system where nobody can track any singular metadata of you. takes a lot of time, effort, and energy to upkeep a system like this. And sometimes it's also enough to use part of the system that fits your goals. Safe communications can be done very much easier than setting up a full private black box financial system for yourself, because then we start needing to talk about new laptops, new devices. But I see my time is running out. I'll be hanging around for another 20 minutes here if you have more questions, and I wish all of you a very nice conference.